Thank you for tuning in to What in the World is Going On. Today we will discuss the following: the illegal immigrant gang turf war in Chicago. Chicago has seen several conflicts between Black and Latino communities. The migrant crisis has created tensions between the city's large Mexican-American communities and recently arrived illegal immigrants, many of whom are from Venezuela, thus creating a very complex situation. Chicago-based gangs maintain connections to and influence over gangs in outlying suburban communities. An estimated 70 to 75 gangs with more than 150,000 members reportedly operate within Chicago and have consistently been a concern for law enforcement. Chicago is considered the most gang-occupied city in the United States, with 150,000 gang-affiliated tenants, representing more than 100 gangs. Gang warfare and retaliation are common in Chicago. Gangs were responsible for 61% of the homicides in Chicago in 2011. What races has the most gangs? The following aggregated percentages are reported nationally: Hispanic 44%, African American 35%, Caucasian 14%, Asian 5%, and others 2%. The 1996 National Youth Gang Survey revealed that Hispanics and African Americans constitute the majority of gang members. In recent decades, Chicago gangs have morphed in response to police crackdowns, the demolition of housing projects, and demographic shifts. Some have formed alliances with politicians and police, even elevating officers to gang-affiliated drug kingpins. Some have splintered and fallen into violent battles. In 2021, the Black Caucus and Latino council members fought over redistricting, which would redraw the city's 50 city council wards. The Black Caucus wanted to preserve 16 of 18 majority Black seats, while Latino council members wanted more representation. The influx of illegal immigrants coming from South America within the past 3 to 4 years has increased the rise in gang membership. The Chicago faction of the Latin gangs, Kings, is recognized as one of the largest Hispanic street gangs in the United States after the Serenos and the Nortinos, as well as MS-13 and the 18th Street Gang, and one of the largest street gangs based in Chicago. The Latin Kings were founded in the Humboldt Park area of Chicago in 1954 by Ramon Santos as the Imperials, a Puerto Rican progress movement to overcome racial discrimination. With the Latino community facing constant violence from Greek and Italian greaser gangs, the Imperials merged with various other Puerto Ricans and Mexican street gangs to form the Latin Kings. The gang was pivotal in the development of a broader gang culture in Humboldt Park that exists today, with its origin focus being on fighting back against discrimination. The gang would later, however, dissolve into a criminal enterprise operating throughout the United States. There are two umbrella factions: the King Motherland Chicago, KMC, also known as the King Manifesto and Constitution, and Bloodline, formed in New York City in 1986. All members of the gang identify themselves as Latin Kings. Folk Nation began as an affiliation of Chicago street gangs in the 1980s, which were allies of the Gangster Disciples. The increased number of gang members entering the Chicago prison population created the need for immediate means of identifying allies from rivals. Folk Nation maintains a charter and a strict code of conduct driven by the all for one and one for all philosophy. The Folk Nation was formed on November 11, 1978, within the confines of the Stateville Correctional Center. Larry Hoover, the chairman of the Gangster Disciple Nation, created the idea for the alliance and persuaded many leaders of large Black, white, and Latino gangs from Chicago to join. Folk Nation was created to protect the counter People Nation invading neighborhoods. Folk Nation is still active today. The territory is nationwide, and the ethnicity is multi-ethnic. Folk Nation allies are various Crip factions. The rivals are the people nation. Their criminal activities involve drug trafficking, burglary, extortion, and homicide. A violent Venezuelan gang is setting up operations in New York City, using migrant shelters to build a criminal network involved in theft and drugs. They are expanding to other cities, including Chicago. To exacerbate the problem, the United States Drug Enforcement Administration stated that the Sinaloa cartel has compounded Chicago's crime problem with the steady supply of drugs from Mexico. Venezuelan migrants moving into Chicago's South Side has caught the attention of the city's gangs, with some fearing that an impending turf war between local gangs and their Venezuelan counterparts. The arrival of Venezuelan gangs has been linked to a rise in crime, with residents reporting increased criminal activity and gang encroachment on traditional territories. Many residents and gang members express concerns about the potential for increased violence due to the rivalry between the two groups, particularly given the perceived unity of the Venezuelan gangs compared to the divisions among local Chicago gangs. Tyrone Muhammad, a former Chicago gangster who did 20 years in prison and now runs a violent prevention program, said in a report for the New York Post, "When black gangs get fed up with the illegalities and criminal activities of these migrants and non-citizens, the city of Chicago is going to go up in flames, and there will be nothing the National Guard or the government can do about it when the bloodshed hits the street. It'll be blacks against migrants." The Venezuelan notorious Tren de Aragua gang, during their arrival, has started to encroach on the territory of the city's local gangs. In 2020, some Little Village residents reported an increase in Latino gang activity against African Americans, noticeably a drive-by shooting in the O Block in September 2024 by Venezuelan gangs. According to Zach Massey, a local Chicago gang member, told the New York Post, "They are moving in on our territory and robbing people, but they don't get arrested like we do." According to Massey, while communicating with one of the Venezuelan gang members, he was told how the government helped him get a car, an apartment, an EBT card, and all the stuff. And they don't even have a social security number. The Biden-Harris administration has released thousands of illegal immigrants into the United States impoverished communities through the broken borders. The latest figure shows Chicago spent almost $500 million over the last 2 years in the more than 42,000 migrants who arrived in 2022. Many have been given money for rent, food, stamp cards, and even cars, and some landlords have pushed out local African Americans because they can get more government money for housing migrants. Some illegal migrants belong to the one-time Venezuelan prison gang turned vicious multinational crime syndicate, Tren de Aragua, who, according to sources in Chicago, are heavily armed. The gang is brazenly spilling into areas of the South Side. These areas are traditionally controlled by hundreds of entrenched gangs, from the Chicago Gangster Disciples, Black P. Stones, to the Vice Lords, Latin Kings, and Satan's Disciples. The truth is, the Biden-Harris administration has allowed gangs from South America to enter our country. Gangs that they would consider ex-terrorist groups. Failed Democratic Party policies have sold Chicago citizens down the river. Chicago is a blue city and Illinois is a blue state, and people have woken up. The call of the Chicago citizen to repeal sanctuary city status is now more abundant. Chicago is a city that is restricted regarding overcrowded buildings and housing limitations. Those restrictions are also limited regarding an overcrowded population. Chicago is overpopulated. Crime has taken a drastic toll on the city and the citizens due to criminal activity. The bottom line is politicians of Illinois have to make better policy-making decisions regarding the protections of its citizens. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe.